what we're starting to get is this need to be able to, one, elevate the way in which we see entities in government. We've obviously come from an optic past where everybody paints a certain brush. The second one is obviously this perception in terms of safety and security. I mean, as I mentioned to you, I do lots of work for La Liga, and La Liga in Spain has become so successful. Not only because of the football field, they're 5x their turnover because they've been able to create an integrated public transport system that gets people in and out of the stadium. It changes why people arrive at a stadium. It changes the perception of people who otherwise would not come in there, right? It creates an enabling environment. It changes the dynamics of how we create big events and come together. And 2010 was a fantastic case of it. And then we didn't really resurrect that. And this is a classic example. Is this something we can see more of coming through in terms of being able to look at other sporting events, etc.?
And actually, I'd like to pick your brain on that one. I mean, going forward, maybe not here, but
Sure.
because at the moment, PRASA can serve all of our major stadiums,
Wow.
including FNB, although we're not running to FNB. FNB is one of the lines we need to recover.
Right.
But whether you're talking Ellis Park, you're talking Loftus, you're talking Newlands, you're talking Orlando Stadium, you're talking Moses Mabhida,
Wow.
we've got a station at all of these stadiums. So I think it's something that certainly we're looking forward to looking at how we can maximize through to running some of these services, having key partnerships with some of the sporting bodies and so forth. Um, Key for us going forward is that we must have a sustainable working arrangement
Sure.
around that. I
Sure.
mean, and as you've mentioned, it has to be part of an integrated system.
Yes.
Rail is not a door-to-door service,
100%.
but it's your backbone linking with other modes of transport.
It's interesting you mentioned Minister Creasy, right? Having somebody who was MEC for finance for a significant amount of time obviously helps, because one of the challenges in terms of the public service is the way in which legislation is set up does make it difficult to be able to make decisions, to be more agile. To what Mariana Mazzucato, who's on the President's Advisory Council, talks about, the entrepreneurial state. It's harder because we've got many limitations, the PFMA, the MFMA in municipalities, etc. Does it help, or are we seeing a shift in terms of how we create a very big, bloated SOC public sector environment to be a lot more agile, responsive to certain things? Are we starting to see some of that coming through?
Look, the bureaucracy, I think, is an issue that one needs to deal with. But if you look at some of the changes with legislation happening, the procurement and bill and so forth, it's certainly geared towards that.
Right.
Because the key term here is for us to have agility.
Yes.
I mean, one looks at the PFMA and all of these legislation. It was not, at the time it was created for a different purpose.
Sure.
We are now in this phase where we need to be a lot more agile, developmental, getting things that turn around and so forth. That we need to have that. So we do see that moving forward, the discussions we are having, even now between government and business, there are forums that have been set up by the president.
Yes.
It's looking at how do we be more agile, how do we work more collaboratively around some of the key projects at SOEs within the private sector. Because if you look at getting the SOEs working and functioning properly, it's a catalyst for economic
100%.
growth.
Exactly.
And already we see with what we have done at PRASA and the impact it is having, it's the same across the board.
Brilliant. Let me then ask the last question. You're the president of the Southern African Rail Association. There's lots of work in terms of how we can move goods, services more affordably in the region. Talk to me a little bit around some of the discussions from a regional rail development perspective at SARA.
Yeah, so I've taken up that role this year. I was the vice president the year before. But this is where you've got all the SADC countries that form part of SARA. And there we've got the various rail authorities. And the interesting thing with this association, it's both public and private sector.
Right.
That we've come together, that sits on the board. And I mean, our slogan there is together we're better. And I think it's apt because we need to look at greater connectivity between the SADC region.
Exactly.
Both from a freight as well as a passenger rail perspective. If one just looks at some of the cross-border movements, be it freight, be it rail, looking at how do we, the free intercontinental trade agreements and stuff, we need to get these logistics right.
Yes.
And excitingly, there are some very exciting projects happening in some of the SADC regions. Where I think if going back to your point also about the investment in rail that we spoke about, I think South Africa, there's a lot more we need to do in terms of rail development. If you look at the last 4 decades, our cities have grown significantly,
Yes.
urbanization and so
Yes.
forth. But if you look at the rail expansion, it's been virtually zero.
Yeah.
I can tell you we've built 7 kilometers of new rail in PRASA in this 40 years.
Sure.
It was the 4 kilometers in Khayelitsha and the 3 kilometers in KwaMashu in Durban. That's all we've built. And there's reasons for the budget and all of these things. But rail also needs to expand in line with the growth that we have seen within our cities and other areas as well.